Good morning, everyone, on this beautiful day out and outside recording, and we're going to touch on part 2 of our series about Mike Tyson's life. No, not about Mike Tyson's life, but about his quote, which was, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. We're going to be talking about how everyone's got a retirement plan until they get punched in the mouth, and we're going to talk about punch number 2 today. Punch number 2 is a health crisis. Let me bring in my co-host, Tony Shore, who's not outside with me. You're probably freezing cold where you are, but down here in Florida, it's beautiful. So welcome to the show, Tony.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. It is really cold here right now, but got down into the teens last night. So, yes, it's cold, but the sun is out. It's going to be a warmer day today. We might get up to 40 if we're lucky.
Well, Tony up in Minnesota is going to be talking to me today about a health crisis, which is punch number 2. Now, we've done this show in the years past, and so you know the Mike Tyson reference that we make. Punch 2 is negative health event. And
so round 2.
Boom. Round two. Right. So last week we talked about Wall Street, how that is the Wall Street bell, but also the bell to get in the ring with Mike Tyson. We talked about a market correction. So if you haven't seen that, watch that. And I said that was the easy one to deal with. Of the 3 major punches, that's the easiest one. Today, we're going to talk about one that's a lot more difficult to plan for, and that is a health crisis. Many people, they have retirement plans and dreams, and then something unexpected happens, and it's usually a negative health event for you or your spouse, and then everything kind of goes downhill from there.
Well, Dan, before we jump into that, speaking of health, we should explain to the listeners, you wanted to be outside today. You mentioned that you're kind of in the shadows today, but it's okay because the key is the background, and that's your backyard. And I see there beyond the netting there, beyond your
screen
enclosure, the screened enclosure, your pool enclosure, you can see some water back there. And I know you have about a 5-foot alligator wandering around back there.
He's back there.
Looking for kids and pets. That's not good.
If I catch a picture of him today, I will throw it in the notes on this YouTube channel.
That would be great. Don't get too close though, Dan. Don't risk any limbs to get that photo. Speaking of health, I wanted to mention the alligator because that could drastically affect your health if you get too close.
Right. I got to watch my dog carefully. If he comes out, I won't get a snapshot of him. I'd say this. Physical health is the big one that people think about. Mental health is also important. You've dealt with that with your family recently. Your parents have, dementia or whatever you want to call it. And I consider that physical and mental. And it could be taxing, especially for a couple who's in retirement. They had all this plans to do stuff. The health event that takes them out really destroys both retirements in a way because of the time and the commitment to take care of one another. But it also can destroy you financially if you're not prepared for it. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And I think in the past, a lot of financial advisors don't really talk about it. You'll hear, and you probably can say you hear this a lot. Oh, you're going to need $300,000 for health care in retirement, right?
Yep, I hear advisors say that all the time.
And that's not only boring, it's kind of disingenuous because you don't need a lump sum. So it's kind of like saying, hey, Tony, you're going to buy this house, but be careful, you're going to need $200,000 to pay the home taxes on it, the property taxes. And you're like, 200,000 property tax? What are you talking about? Well, over the life of your house for the next 20 years, you're going to have to pay $20,000, $5,000 a year for 20 years. So there's $200,000 in property taxes. That's not how health events work. You're not going to get a bill for $250,000, $300,000. Now there could be something crazy that happens, but for the majority of people, 99%, the bills are going to be ongoing. It's going to be an expense that you pay for. So when advisors and people throw out a big number, it's kind of a scare tactic. It's kind of lazy. And I don't like looking at it that way. but I don't like advisors that ignore it altogether. So at least
Yeah.
talking about it is important.
Sure, you have to talk about having money to pay health care and where it's going to come from. And you have to talk about healthcare concerns in retirement because it does affect you financially, especially like my parents now both have Parkinson's. They're going to need, my dad's got to figure out, he's got to go into assisted living, but he has enough resources where Medicaid isn't going to kick in. But does he have enough monthly income to cover the cost? And how
Right.
long is that going to last? And is he going to have to sell some things? So that's a tough one.
And not incorporating healthcare costs, healthcare issues in your retirement income plan is a bad deal. So the solution is you have to incorporate it into retirement planning. A lot of advisors will say, well, what do you think about Medicare? Or what, the people will ask this because I want to retire, but what about health insurance or what about Medicare? And a lot of advisors will say, well, I don't touch that. You're going to have to talk to an insurance agent about that because I get that specializing and having someone that will talk to your clients specifically about that issue is important, but you got to incorporate it. You can't just be like, oh yeah, well, someone else will deal with that. No, a financial planner has to deal with this. This is a punch to the face that could destroy you. So if you're not talking about it, and that's the big problem with this, Tony, no one likes to talk about it. No one likes to talk about their mortality. No one certainly likes to talk about getting Parkinson's, right? Now, not everyone's going to get this, and not everyone's going to need to spend big bucks on this, but if you don't factor it in, you're doing yourself a disservice. You can't bury your head in the sand on this.
Yeah. So it's a balance. You can't let scare tactics scare you into thinking I don't have enough money to retire because of this huge amount that I may need. No, you just need to have a strategy. Okay. If when you're 80 years old, you need long-term care, maybe a plan set up ahead of time so you don't have to sell the farm or the business or the house or,
right.
It just makes sure you have some thought put into healthcare expenses because I think you're right. That's a huge punch in the face.
And people don't talk about it. The advisors talk about a market correction all the time. There's channels dedicated to market corrections, right? But people don't talk about a health correction or a health care crisis. They don't.
Right.
You don't, you joke about it. You talk about it with, the doddering old family member, but it's the people that are going through it with their parents that are more attuned to it. It's the single people who don't have a spouse to rely on that are more attuned to, what is going to happen? So let me go through some solutions here.
Sure.
And the first one is insurance, medical insurance. A lot of people think Medicare is going to cover this. You know that. You just mentioned Medicaid, which is state run. Each state's different. Medicare does not cover long-term care. Medicare will cover doctors and hospital visits, but it's not going to cover a nursing home.
Yeah, it's not going to cover 100% of prescriptions. It's not going to cover vision, dental, and hearing if you don't have a supplemental or a Advantage plan that does.
Right.
So, and there's still premiums and deductibles with Medicare. People don't realize there are still costs. It's not 100% free.
Right. So you got to know this. You got to understand what Medicare covers and what it doesn't.
Right.
And for those that aren't yet 65 that are looking to retire, you have to factor in the Affordable Care Act, ACA plans, the healthcare subsidies, Obamacare, some people call it. So I'll put a show up here. It's a very popular show talking about what to do if you're thinking about retiring before Medicare and how you get coverage. But it's important to incorporate that. So this is the number one defense that you can have, is having comprehensive medical coverage, so that if something does happen to you negative wise with health, you're going to be covered for the most part. So that's your baseline. And if you have any gaps in your health insurance, that's a problem. So financial planning, retirement planning, you have to have comprehensive medical coverage, no matter how old you are. Bottom line. I think most people get this though, but I think they get tripped up thinking that long-term care is covered by Medicare. Still, people do that.
Yep. Yeah. And that's a good point.
Yeah. So long-term care insurance Or long-term care coverage is another topic altogether. This would be if you need a home health aide to come in and live with you to take care of you or your spouse, or if you need to go to an assisted living facility, or you need to go to a long-term care facility, a private nursing home, and then you'll see the big scary numbers. Genworth does its annual cost of care, which I use those numbers for planning. And when I'm doing financial planning, I'm using real numbers, but they're scary. And it's, $60,000 in 2024 to have a nurse come into your house 24/7. You fast forward that with inflation 20 years from now, that could be 200,000 a year. And people start to say, well, that's, I'm just gonna go in the back of the lake here and with my concrete shoes and I'll be okay. That's not, you get a giggle out of that, but that's not how life works.
Right.
So I did a show on long-term care, I think 5 ways to pay for it.
Yeah.
Watch that show.
That's a good one.
That is something that we need to start focusing on when you're dealing with retirement planning. Get that long-term care conversation in early. There's no excuse, because you're probably not going to need it, but the odds are higher the longer you live. So it's ironically the people that are the most healthy that are most likely going to need long-term care, which is strange. Like your grandfather, he lived to 101.
Yeah.
He didn't need long-term care except at the very end, right?
2 months.
2 months.
And it was hospice, but yes.
Hospice. Yeah. That's a little different now. Hospice is covered by Medicare, but he didn't need long-term care. And he was healthy. So he's like the anomaly.
He is the anomaly in many ways. Yeah,
right?
He was. Yeah.
So if you're going to live to 100, say, which is also an anomaly, but it's more and more. If you're going to live to 100, odds are you're going to need long-term care of some sort at some time. Your grandfather was just a bad example of that.
Yeah.
Because he was driving an RV at 98 or whatever.
Yeah. So he was still driving almost up to 100, and then he had other people drive. But 99. I saw him drive his truck into town at 99. So.
But you have to think, hey, long-term care, that's not going to be me. Most people don't think, and a lot of people self-fund. So watch that video, because that's
the majority of people will need long-term care. Those are the facts. Over 70% of everyone will need long-term care. Some little point, but it may not be the $300,000 a year for 10 years type thing, right? Yeah,
which gets people scared, and then they ignore it. The other big part about managing a health crisis is that you should have your documentation planned out ahead of time. Your health directives, living will, health power of attorney, which is different. It's called different things by different people, but basically, if you can't make your health decisions, who's going to?
Right.
And a lot of people assume, well, it'll just be my spouse. Yeah, but what if your spouse isn't around, or what if they're incapacitated? Oh, my kids will make it. Well, which kid? Because you don't want to put them in a situation where they're fighting and making health decisions for you. So get that stuff handled ahead of time. I'm dealing with a client now. Her mom was fine, no issues. And then like that, the next thing you know, she's talking to the neighbor in gibberish. She came off her meds and she's got some form of dementia. And it happened on the turn of a dime, right? And just the week before, she came in the office and we did her medical directives and her power of attorney for financial. Perfectly fine, but next week, not fine. So she's okay now, but you just never know. So you might as well get those things done. And this helps you avoid, because it's not all about the financial punches, but this is a prime example of, hey, my mom needs some extra money to pay for nursing home. What do we do? Do we sell her assets? Do we not? Like, how do we Medicaid? How does it work? Think about who can actually act upon her behalf. Well, my brother wants to do this and I want to do that. That's a problem. And that could be a knockout punch to someone just because they didn't plan ahead.
Communication is the key too when it comes to that estate planning, figuring that out ahead of time before you get to that point, which most people don't because they put it off. But
they put it off.
Yeah.
Because we're invincible, right? We're not going to die. Or we're not.
I know I'm not aging. Will
happen to other people, right?
I don't know about you. I'm not aging.
Right.
But
you got to look at it. You got to be real. So the other big thing, and we just did a show recently on how a widow or widower tax bracket and tax implications change as a result of a spouse dying. I'll put that up here. If that happens, you don't plan for it, you're in trouble. So if your spouse dies, you're going to lose income, Social Security or pension. So you have to factor in this early, and you have to factor in either one of you needing extra income later in life to pay for medical. So you don't have to actually necessarily get long-term care insurance, but you have to have some sort of plan that if you need to hire a nurse to come in to help you, who's going to pay for it and how? If you plan that in the beginning stages and say, oh, this income plan has a little boost over here in case we run into a long-term care event or a health crisis, you do that early. You do that in the beginning, not scramble afterward.
Yeah.
And then again, taxes.
Taxes is a real punch in the face in retirement for some people.
Right. You have to know the tax rules about long-term care costs. Can you write it off? Is there a qualified tax, plan for long-term care? My big suggestion, besides just planning for a loss of a spouse or a spouse incapacitated, having the income and the tax bracket changes, is to focus on a health savings account, particularly obviously before you retire. So talk to people about this. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to retire in 5 years, maybe now's the time to start overfunding a health savings account or funding a health savings account and not using it for health, just letting it roll up, because that's tax-free income later for your inevitable healthcare expenses. So I think, and I'll put the show up here that we've done on health savings accounts, because that's huge. The number one financial tool out there. And I think it's a really powerful way to plan for health crisis in retirement. You can go to that pool of money tax-free to pay for a health crisis, which a lot of people don't think about. Here's another one that people really neglect, and that's the home value. I don't have, where am I going to come up with $300,000 to cover a nursing home for the next 5 years? I'm done. I'm just, forget it. I don't even have that much money. A lot of people have that much money in the value of their home, and that's in the video of how to pay for long-term care, is using your home. A lot of people are thinking the home is the last resort. It doesn't have to be. You don't want to become destitute or destroy your whole financial picture because you're unwilling to recognize your home value as an asset to use in times of health crisis. So consider that, consider that. And I think, like, you've seen a lot of people that, struggle with healthcare costs as they get older. How often do you hear them say, well, I can tap into the house? A lot of people don't think of that way. If they want to remodel the house, they think, oh, I could use a home equity line of credit. But if they're like, I got to remodel my house to put a wheelchair ramp, or I need money to pay for an assisted living facility, or I need money to pay for a nurse to come in, why not use the value of your home? People sitting on this big asset to do what? So they could die and pass it to their kids who don't want it? Spoiler alert, your kids don't want your house.
Right.
Maybe in your family, Tony, is a little different because you have a family farm. So
right.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't mean you can't continue to use the family assets to generate income to pay for a health crisis.
Right.
Stop being so with the blinders on about using home, as a last resort always. It doesn't have to be a last resort. And the only other point I want to make here, Tony, we did a show on blue zones. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, where people live longer.
How does this relate to dealing with a health crisis or planning for it?
Preventative care.
Obviously, the best way to avoid to deal with long-term care costs is to avoid it. And so lifestyle, diet, but that's social connections. That social connection. We did a show where I said, if I had $10,000, where would I spend it? If I won the lotto, what's the best place to spend it? Or invest it? Where's the best place to invest? I said, invest in your social networks, invest in your friends, because that's what's going to get you through. The true value of friendships and family is to be there when each other needs each other, right? Yeah. Your parents are going through crisis. You're there helping. Yeah. If you weren't there, think about that. Yeah. Right. So if you don't have family, build strong social connections. I think about the Golden Girls, that show. I mean, that was a great show. There's a St. Olaf reference for you, right? Up in Minnesota.
Yeah. There you go.
They were taking care of each other. What's wrong with that? The extended family, like, it's kind of fallen out of favor, but I think it should come back.
Yeah.
But watch that Blue Zone show that we did. I think it was pretty good.
It's a good one.
So healthcare planning should be a foundational part of retirement planning. So if your financial planner, your retirement planner isn't addressing healthcare crisis and how they can handle it, you're just setting yourself up for a knockout punch, really. It's going to happen, right? You said it, Tony. People are going to need it. Somebody's going to need it in your family.
Yeah.
So if you ignore it out of fear, that doesn't help. If you ignore it out of ignorance, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand. Ignorance is bliss until you have a health crisis. Then it's like, geez, now what, right? So I suggest people tackle this head on and just go for it. Just talk about it. And it's funny, when I meet people for the first time and they're getting to know me to say, oh, do I want to hire this guy to help me with my retirement? I'm asking questions about their parents, their longevity, life expectancies, how their health is. And it's kind of weird because, hey, I thought we were talking about financial planning here. Why are we talking about health? And I talk about it day one because I don't feel like I'd be doing them any service. I'd be doing a disservice if I ignored healthcare.
Right.
You know it, Tony. Think about the people that you know that are retired. What's the big punch to their face? Is it truly a market meltdown? Or is it some nonsense with health?
It's nonsense with health. Everyone I know, my mother-in-law, my parents, it's really come down to that, especially in the later years. It's just, that's where it's at. So get ahead of it, plan for healthcare, think about revisiting your retirement plan if you haven't built in healthcare or health crisis prevention, or what are you going to do? What's your plan? What's your plan A? What's your plan B? If you haven't done that, get back on it. If you're thinking about doing this and you're like, wow, I never had this conversation. I don't want to have it, but I should have it. Just give me a call. I'll give you the list of questions and list of tactics and things you think about. Best way to reach me, 888-508-5935, or go to dolphinfinancialgroup.com. Tony, thanks for a good show. That's round 2 in the books. Yep.
Yes. We got round 3 coming next week. We'll see you then, everybody.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.